Well, hello there. Welcome back, everyone. So last time we had a real quick cursory glance at how to make some fire in Embergen. And at the time, I promised that we'd make a bomb or an explosion or something like that. I went away, came up with a couple of ideas, and basically arrived on this one, which is probably the simplest way to achieve that. I call this like a single emitter explosion, or maybe an ignition temperature-based explosion. So it should only take about 10-15 minutes to get through, and the results are pretty good. So let's get started. So I've got this new scene over here. Starts up with a primitive and an emitter already going. I'm going to, first of all, take down our temperature. Let's just make it emit no temperature whatsoever. I'm going to keep the smoke on because there's this weird bug, right? If I go over to the, where is it, shading, over to fuel, render the fuel. This is what actually ignites and catches fire, and it's being produced by this emitter. I can change the amount that's being put out. So if I go back to the beginning, ramp it right up, it kicks out a ton of fuel. We're not gonna do that just yet. Back to the beginning, we can see our fuel. That's pretty good. We want it to suddenly catch fire, right? We don't want it to gradually catch fire because there's not much force in that. That's just creating fire. We want to get a load of fuel and then suddenly ignite all of it. Bit like a bomb. So, like I said, there's probably a few ways to do this. The simplest way that I've found is going to be this. I'm going to get our fuel rate to like 50. I'm going to completely remove the temperature emission. So it kicks out the fuel and it doesn't heat it up at all. It's just dumping fuel into the scene. Move over to our simulation node. This is a cool thing to play around with. You go over to your combustion tab, and click on advanced parameters. Somewhere in here, you've got ignition temp. This is the temperature at which that fuel will ignite. And you can change where that point is. So if I whack it all the way up to the top, the fuel's going to have to get to that temperature before it actually becomes fire. And if I drag it all the way down here, it doesn't have to be any temperature before it catches fire. So if I hit play now, it all catches, right? And yeah, it can be fun if you're just playing. Just ramp this all the way up, fill out fuel, drag it all the way to the left, and it explodes. We're going to animate that because, you know, this isn't how you make a CGI movie, pulling sliders in real time. It was cool fun to play around with. So we're going to do some keyframes. Over here on the bottom left, you've got the timeline for Embergen. It's a bit like After Effects, 3ds Max, Blender. You decide which properties are going to have which values at which time. Keyframes are pretty simple. You can animate most things in Embergen, actually quite a lot you can animate, but you have to tell it that you want to animate it first. Let's go with our combustion ignition temperature. Over on the left-hand side, you've got this little circle. Click that once, you enable keyframes for it. So you can now change those values over time. And we do that by, let's zoom right out, go right back to the beginning. I'm going to put our slider to frame 0. And I'm going to say, by moving this value, it's going to set a keyframe. If you watch this area down here. So at this point, the fuel has to have this value in order to ignite. I'm going to go over to frame, let's go 100. And then I'm going to say, at this point, I want you to be 0 before you catch fire. So in theory, between these two keyframes, the computer's going to do the work and it's going to change the value between those 2 points. You watch this here. It's going to go all the way back up to that starting point and then back down to 0 as we go this way. But there's a problem in that. We don't know exactly where it's going to catch fire. I mean, we could probably find out by looking at the emitter. If we just play it, there it goes. I would probably pull this one along to like, let's say, like 300 or something, somewhere around there. And I would set another keyframe just before it. And for that keyframe, I would say you need to have that. Oh, it's not going to set it actually. it's a weird thing when you're trying to set keyframes, they're too close to each other, they don't seem to kick in. So I'm going to come back here, set a keyframe there. It's got this new one, which is a duplicate of the first one, saying like you have to have this really high temperature, this really high barred across before you actually ignite. It's just a copy of that. I'm going to move it to just before this one. So now as we watch this value over time, 6,000 all the way through until right at this last moment, it suddenly drops down to 0. That's what we want. So we play this, should have fuel, 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 and then all of a sudden, there it goes. So you might have noticed, if we continue playing this, we've still got fire coming out from underneath. It's because the emitter is still pushing fuel into the sim. So we want to stop it pushing out fuel at this point because it's just exploded and spent all the fuel. Do that with keyframes. So we go to our emitter and we find you could do it with fuel emission. You could keyframe it to be either on or off. I tend to do a fuel rate because I'm weird like that. So I'm going to set this keyframe. I'm going to go all the way to the beginning. I'm going to enable keyframes for this. So click once there and you'll see that it comes up here. And then I'm going to give it a value. I'm going to say, let's go with 100. And it's giving us that keyframe of 100 at frame 0. It's going to continue being 100 until we tell it otherwise. We're going to tell it otherwise about here. In fact, let's make our duplicate. We'll do exactly what we did with the temperature. So carry on being 100. And then at this point, be 0. So if we now watch this value for fuel rate, back at the beginning, 100, 100, 100. Something's amiss there. Oh, that seems all right. And then rapidly descends to nothing. So at this point, no more fuel is going to be produced and put into the simulation. So let's watch that happen. It should explode, and then no more fire should come up from underneath it. Fuel, fuel, fuel. Bang. And then all done. We've got some smoke left over. So our emitter, and this is the weird thing about visualizing fuel. In a shading tab, you can visualize the fuel with this tick box, turn it on and off, right? You don't want to render it in your final animation, but you want to be able to see it so you can control it and do stuff with it. Let's leave that on for now. But if my emitter kicks out no smoke, then I can't see the fuel. I don't know if that's a bug or if there's an actual reason for that. So I just tend to leave this at 10, just while I'm getting the fuel burst ready. And then once I'm happy with it, I'll remove it. So smoke emission, no emission. It should just appear like that. Put that back on for now because we want to make our fuel do stuff. So like we come back out, hit B to see our bounds, we're already right up against the edges. Okay, so simulation tend to work with 256, 256, 128. Because I want this thing to explode outwards, not up. Apply that. Might go a little bit slower, but we'll roll with it. So now that fuel's got a bit more room to move around in. And what could we use to move it around? We could use some forces. Let's have a look. There's two different places that you can apply forces. You can apply a force like this noise is already being applied to the emitter. We can apply it to the simulation overall. And applying it to the simulation overall is kind of more costly to the computer. It's got to do a bit more thinking about it. I think, I may not be correct. When you're applying it to the emitter, it's only affecting that object. So let's take that off, slap it into there. And I'm going to bring this amplitude right down, the power of the noise. I'm going to bring it down to 0.1 because it's really, really amplified when you apply it to a simulation. Simulation speed, bring that right down as well. Probably scale, ramp it up a bit because I want this fuel to have some blobs in it and a bit of motion because that's going to influence the shape of the explosion that comes out. What else can we do with this? Let's ramp up that animation speed again. See what that does. It's not too bad. I might bring that scale down there. Let's go see what 4 looks like. There's so much backwards and forwards with this, but luckily you don't have to wait like 12 minutes to see a couple of frames. You see that our flames look like really big. That's not good. It looks like we're blowing up a tiny like model of a train or something. So yeah, there's some things that we can do with that. You might think simulation, like let's give it loads more voxels so that the fire appears smaller. Not always the case, and in any case, that's going to slow down your simulation massively. There's a bunch of stuff you can do within the simulation to push a bit more detail into this fire and the smoke. So let's look at a couple of ways of doing that. Let's go back and ramp that noise back up again, because I liked it at 16. Let's go 12. Maybe I'll up the amp just to give it a bit more motion. Pretty good. And yeah, you can see like there's some detail there, but you definitely got these arcing shapes that are quite big and quite generic. You kind of want to break them up a bit. We've got in our simulation node, which again is like the brains of what's going on, got some shredding. We can make it so the hotter parts of the explosion push outward more. We've got some, I definitely like playing with wind, so that gives everything a bit of chaotic motion that can push things around. That would affect the fire and the smoke and also the fuel to begin with, so that would push that around and that would give us a different shape. What else have we got? Turbulence is a good one, and like you should use this quite sparingly. Let's just dump in like 5, 5 and 5 and see what that does. There is definitely a bit more detail in there. It goes crazy. If you whack it right up, you get really weird looking stuff happening. See all this flickering. Reminds me of like the really old school 3ds Max volumetrics. So let's maybe like 15, 15, 15. See what that does. Yeah, look at that. It's much more broken up. So another thing, I would say, if you're working on a project for a client, and you have to hand over an explosion to a compositor, someone else to work with, you know, you sign off your bit and you hand it to someone else. They're going to send this back to me and say, like, oh, it's too blown out, Ben. Like, I can't push the colors to get any detail out of it. When you work in that way, you have to kind of really flatten the image, and not make it too bright, too overblown. Me myself, when it's my stuff, it's an explosion, it's fire, it's gonna be overexposed when you're shooting it with a camera. So I tend to just let it be like that. You've got some control over how bright this fire is going to be in your shading over here, and I believe further on in render and scene you can probably bring that down a bit as well. I think we could do with some more smoke in this, or at least darker or thicker smoke. And I might also make the simulation slightly taller. Let's see how well it performs when we've got to do 5.6 all the way. Chug a bit. Oh, that's not too bad. Get rid of the skybox and the ground. Pretty nice. By the time it gets to this point, it's all quite uniform. It all seems to happen at the same time, all the way across the explosion. So maybe we can break that up a bit. Let's mess with our turbulence. Maybe the size. Let's try it at 5. Why not? Yeah. Looking back to 1. Hey, well, that has just reminded me. You see these little stretching arcs, like this funnel that's coming up behind the explosion. You can really mess around with. In fact, if we were to make this a little bit bigger, and hope that I don't break my computer. Roll in a little bit now. Let's bring these guys in a bit so we don't have to wait so much. In simulation force, I'm going to enable blocking Z ground. So as it stands currently, it explodes. It doesn't interact with anything in the scene. Turning it on blocking Z ground, it tells the bounding box lower part, the floor, to be like a solid object and for the volume to kind of stick to it a little bit. And you'll see that as it rises up, it's going to leave behind like this mushroom cloud shape. It kind of was before, but it's much more apparent now. So as it lifts, the buoyancy pulls it up, it's sort of leaving behind some smoke. That donut's starting to bother me now. Let's get rid of that. Cool. I'm going to turn this turbulence right down again. Maybe I'll turn the fuel off in a moment. Or maybe we can throw some different forces at it to move the fuel around to get different shapes. Because like it's all a bit small and wispy. Let's do that now. Let's go with force noise. Chuck them in there. Ramp it right up. We can get some big sort of lumps of fuel. Because now you can see it's not equal all the way around. It's not symmetrical in any way. So as it ignites, those lumps of fuel are going to be a bit more intense than the rest. There we go. Like sculpting with fire. It's not bad. I'm going to pause it just as it starts to get to like the halfway mark between fireball and smoke. And I'm going to mess around with the shading a bit. A few different things you can do. I've noticed that like the smoke itself is actually quite thin. It's quite transparent. So I'm going to thicken it up a bit with the volume node. Use a post mod. I'm going to activate this. I think by default it's got smoke enabled. If we go in, you'll be able to see what's happening here as I drag this point into the left. It's basically it's like stacking the smoke on top of itself and just really thickening up. It's not changing where the smoke is in any way, and it's not changing how that smoke interacts with the fire. It's changing sort of how thick the display of it is. And that will have a knock-on effect with how bright the fire is, because it's going to occlude it. It's going to cut some of that out. And we've got control over how much light can penetrate through this smoke, independently of this. So if we thicken the smoke up a bit, it looks ridiculous if you drag it all the way over. Let's just go like halfway for now. See what it looks like. A little bit slower since I gave it that extra space around. It might reduce the size in a moment. It might be the turbulence that's doing it though. Let's see. Up it there. But we see where the hottest part is, where the coldest part is down here. I'm a fan of using blocking Z ground, but I'm going to turn it off now because I don't think it's really adding anything. And I'm going to go to shading. We're going to look at the scattering. So on this left side over here, we've got a bunch of controls here under shading and then scattering. This controls how light is affecting smoke in the scene. So direct light, there's an ambient light there. There's a directional light somewhere. It's kind of pointing that way. Let's point it somewhere obvious so we can see. Oh, there we go. Back to shading, back to scattering. So the contribution of the direct light to the scattering, we ramp this up. We see that light's coming from that light, penetrating through the smoke, and it's kind of coming out the other side. All right. We can bring that right down if you want. Depends, like, are you working on something that's in a nighttime shot, in a daytime shot? Is it a well-lit area? Is it between a couple of city block buildings or something? It'd be quite dark if that was the case. But also you've got the flame contribution to it. We drag this down. This is another thing that can really help with thickening up that smoke. You can really blow it out as well. Let's put them back where he was. Shut the masking on. Mess around with this. See, to me, that's already selling it as a slightly larger scale explosion. It's all very subjective, though. You know, you're probably going to spend ages just messing around with individual sliders. Let's just see what that does to the animation as a whole. Yeah, not so bright when it ignites now. I want it to be angry. Another thing I can look at back in the simulation, because what we're doing right now is visual. We're not altering the properties of the animation. If we go back to the simulation tab, make a change there, it could change everything. And I want to look at the combustion because this is the secret sauce. This is a bunch of properties that can drastically affect how the explosion explodes, right? So oxygen and fuel is a big one, probably. Let's go back and try it out. I'm going to reduce our size for a bit because we can make it bigger again later. And go 128 just to make it play back nice and smooth. Nice and smooth. So think about how you would expect fuel to ignite. If it doesn't have much oxygen around it, it's probably going to ignite at a slower rate. What was it called? Is it the thermobaric bombs that were reported on the news? They are fuel air bombs. They're like a two-stage explosion, in my understanding. They'll inject air into the atmosphere at a really rapid rate. I don't know quite how they do it, but they squirt this fuel through the air over a massive radius, so it's mixed with the air, and then they ignite that, and it causes a massive, rapid, hot explosion. So with our simulation combustion tab, this oxygen and the fuel could maybe be like an allegory to that. Let's just see what it's like. It might explode faster. I'd say it kind of did. Certainly didn't spread the fuel any further, but it ignited much faster, I think. What else have we got? Combustion temp gain. So when it explodes, do I want it to explode and be fairly cool, or do I want it to be like hot, like a proper fireball? Let's ramp that up and find out, right? Let's pick up a beer and press play. It's all right. I would maybe this combustion gas release. So that is the expansion. During the explosion, it's kicking out a lot of energy. That gas release makes it grow as it ignites, like an explosion. Let's double this, right? Let's go 120, because I'm sure, in fact, if we were to put it up to 250, it might just nuke my world. Yeah, there we go. So let's go like 120. And I want to color it to be more angry. Maybe what I've done there in the shading tab is I've kind of stopped a lot of that light from coming through. Put those back. Too much smoke. Shading. Really? See what that does. The shading in itself is like, I swear it's a flipping art form anyway. Like you get a default look for the fire, like a default gradient, I believe, and there's some really cool stuff coming in newer versions of Embergen, by the way. There's a really good YouTube video we're talking about what's coming in version 1. So much of this is going to change, including how you use an emitter. You can use particles to kick off an ignition somewhere. You can also use particles to drive how smoke moves and reacts and stuff. And it's really cool. It's worth learning this stuff now anyway, so that you can still build stuff and you've got a general understanding of the app. But yeah, even things like how you export the images are going to change drastically. So let's try and get a good look back for this stuff. Post process. Let's turn that one on again. Let's use another post mod. Use like temperature and flames. Just want to get that intense brightness back. There we go. We do have some smoke there, it's just not particularly thick. Let's bring the top half of this thing back. When you change the size of the bounds as well, it will actually change the nature of how things are moving around slightly. Yeah, we got some smoke there now. I think what was happening there is by default, we went over it in the first video, you've got a ramp that decreases the transparency, or the opacity rather, of the smoke at the top. You can see that in here, slicing mask, 30% of the roof width. So I think while I was looking at it, it was actually removing a lot of the smoke from view. Let's go back. Let's try some different ways of moving this fuel around. Let's get rid of the noise. And I know that I like noise in the simulation, so let's have a separate one there just to drive that. Keep it like 16, amplitude right down. We'll keep the speed. Let's use something else. We've got, let's try loin. So we don't want to push. So this is like a way of pushing smoke around. You can either have it go around the line, or you can have it go along the line. So the push is if you want it to go along the line. Let's just show you that. So it's not particularly apparent, but it is being pushed along this line. So it pushes the fuel, it's going to push the fire, it's going to push the smoke as well. Might be useful to you, might not. Just for shits and giggles, let's push it down towards the ground. See what happens there. Is it even going to ignite? See. Right, but that's not why I wanted this. So let's have no push along the line. Let's have a twist of 2. See what happens. So it's going to go round. And then it's going to push it out a bit as well. So this might be pretty boomy. What I wanted something quite subtle. I just want to shift that fuel around a bit. So I'm going to pop it on an angle. Where are we? So it's X. That's why it's go 45 like that and have it go round. So it should make like a weird loop. We're going to repel strength down a little, see if we can pull it back in towards the center. As it's spinning round this line, it's going to be forced out a little. If I give it some negative pressure, so like negative repel, it's going to pull it back in towards the line, I think. That's creating this arc. See what happens. Look at that. Get that big plume right there. That's pretty cool. So I wonder now how this would look if we have blocking ground. Where are we? Force, Z ground. Let's try that. Not too bad. Ramp this noise up a bit. It seems like a lot of that smoke is really quite translucent. Too bad. As thick as the smoke can go. Not bad. Yeah, and you get that sticking to the ground. Excuse me, sticking to the ground down here. Pretty cool. So what else can we do with this? So you might be making a clip where you need an explosion to explode. What if there's other things in that clip? What if you've got a house that's blowing up? What if you've got someone shooting a rocket at their garden shed? You need this explosion to interact with another entity. So we're going to use a collider. And in the first video, we used a collider to like punch a hole in the middle of a ball of fire to create an empty space. We're going to use, I've got somewhere, and this might look rubbish because I've got rubbish modeling skills. We pull a collider out from the simulation. And don't forget, the collider it behaves a lot like the emitter. You can't use it by itself. It's not going to do anything. We start playing, nothing's going to collide until we feed it a shape and say we want this to be the collider. So let's just try it with the primitive. Let's go with sphere's good, but let's move that sphere around like over here, make him a bit bigger, and we're going to hide our collider. In theory, our explosion is going to do its thing, but when it hits that ball, it's going to curve around it because it can't penetrate, the skin on that. From here, I can't even tell where it is now. It might be in there. Yeah, it's in there. There's been a little hole punched out. All right, so we know that the fire is not going to go inside of that shape. And this is just a primitive. You could build like a house out of some primitive boxes and things. Recently, I did a video of some sort of falling particles in Embergen, and they were falling onto like two primitives. It was like two boxes, and that was repelling particles, and it sort of looked like rain falling down. But you don't have to just use primitives. You can bring in your own files that you've created elsewhere. There's a Blender file somewhere. I made a like a World War II bunker type thing. So let's bring that in. Let's go with import. And this would need its own tutorial in itself. This node. We're bringing in a shape that we've made. That's all you need to know for now. So bunker 1 FBX. I'll make this available as well, so you can download it and bring it into your scene and mess around with it and see how it works. It's just a really simple mesh. It's like Saving Private Ryan, D-Day beaches. Up the top of the cliffs, you've got those big concrete sort of German bunkers, like meter thick concrete walls. that's kind of what I was building there. And I wanted to create a shot a while ago where I wanted it to explode from the inside and for fire to come out the windows, doors, whatever. So let's see if we can get something approaching that. First of all, let's just scale it up a bit. If it goes outside of our bounds, then nothing's going to happen over here. So we want to make it small enough that it's inside, but not make it so small that it looks like a toy train. So let's bring him down something like that. Move him over. Spin around a bit so we can check he's roughly in the middle. Seems good. Here's our openings that we've got there and there. I think there's a door around the side. So we're going to get our emitter to fit inside of this shape, kick out some fuel. That fuel is hopefully not going to leak out too much. And then at some point around frame 200, it's all going to ignite. It's going to expand and it's going to shoot out the windows and doors and stuff. So let's see if I'm right. Already our emitter is too big. So let's bring him down to like 2.8. Maybe even turn the emitter on so we can tell. There he is sticking out. Maybe what I'd do, rotate him around Y by 90 degrees. There we go. Take him into the center a bit more. So he's inside, where you can't see him. Should be giving off some fuel. That fuel shouldn't really escape out these windows, or at least not much. All right, you see it filling up inside. Hey, there we go. So like, what other shapes could you make? What might you need if you were working on something? Maybe one I'll work on is I'll make a 3D model of my car, my natty little Skoda Fabia. And then we'll explode that from the inside out. That'll be fun. I wonder if I could claim insurance on that. Good. Let's mess around with this flame a bit more. Maybe I want more fuel. Maybe I want to... I've got an idea. Because the whole time we've been on our first subdivision of scaling, right? We haven't actually up-resed. And we did this last time when we made the burning plasma. And when we did that, our performance dropped a lot, but we got a lot more fidelity. So let's try that out. It's going to crawl like a motor. Yeah, there we go. That's better. I don't know if any of that video captured while I was trying to rescue it. Rescue the situation. Right, maybe what I'll do at the end of this video then is I'll stop recording and then I'll export an animation with the 2x upscale so you can see what it looks like when it's been bumped up a bit. But maybe before we do that, let's see if we can work any more detail into the flames and stuff. Because it look kind of all right. It's not too bad. Certainly a couple of things that we can do though. That we got. So I did turn off all that turbulence stuff. I reckon that adding some turbulence to the temperature and to the flames may help us. Oh, no, it's still there. Still there. Let's see what that looks like with 15. So this is destructive to how it's actually moving around. It's actually going to change the nature of what's happening, but maybe in a good way. That looked a little bit better. So I don't have a huge amount of history using the turbulence tab. So I might be doing something wrong here. It did seem to, that initial blast, it seemed to carry a lot of sharpness to the flame. Let's also, we've got no shredding. Fix that. 22, everybody needs some shredding. Let's add a bit more vorticity as well. So vorticity is kind of like like a really easy way to build some detail into these simulations. It's at 25, and it's kind of like, let's turn that off, turn that off, turn that off. Might not see anything. But if you see, we've taken out all the things that should be making bumps in the smoke and fire and stuff, apart from the vorticity, this stuff that's going on here. So that's coming from the vorticity that's being set in here. Turn these guys back on. We can bump that up. There's two different versions. I tend to just use normal vorticity. Let's try like 50. It can look really gnarly if you, there, you see that? That was a bit better. If you use too much, it can look a bit rubbish and fake. See what this looks like. Yeah, see, that's nasty. Don't do that. It's kind of all right around 50. Let's go with 40. You can change like which channel this is being operated on in. So I believe it's picking up where there's a lot of velocity and applying it there. You can add it into the smoke as well. See how this goes. Maybe the temperature. Go 50. So we're not changing the amount overall of vorticity. We're changing how it gets mixed in visually. Again, maybe wrong. In my limited experience. Certainly broke it up a bit, and it's breaking up that smoke a little as well, which is good. However, I know that our emitter is all the way forward at the beginning of this bunker, so let's sort that out. Let's pop them towards the back. That'll give us a different look. Maybe we'll get some stuff coming out of here. Put them up towards the back now. I like that. I don't like how it didn't come out the top though. Let's give them some more fuel. Now, I can't just add fuel by typing it in here because we've already programmed Embergen to kick out, what is it, 100 here, up to here where it's still 100 and then nothing. So let's change these keyframes. When you click on one, highlights, you get a box around it, and then over here on the left, it gives you the value of what that keyframe is. So as long as you got it highlighted, you give it a different number, like 200, and then hit return. It should stick, right? So it's now going from 200 on this one on the right. This one we haven't changed yet, it's still 100. So as we go towards it, the value goes down to 100. Let's see what that's like. It's going to start off some smoke, and there's some fuel, and then it's going to kick out more fuel, and then it's going to stop. It should change how violent the explosion is. I would say so, yeah. So that was more fuel inside this shape. What else can we mess around with? Is there anything on the collider we can mess with? Don't want it to emit light. And this would normally show up purple as well, by the way, but because it's coming from an imported shape, it's also got its own display properties here. If I turn these guys off and then turn on the collider, that's what a collider would normally look like, say, if I made a primitive. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, I just wanted to turn off the emitting light so that the building wasn't pushing light into the smoke. That would look rubbish. And we'll turn this stuff back on. So where do we get to? Let's see if we can make it a bit more exciting. Let's try this pre-advection vorticity. What's it saying? I like that. However, I believe due to the turbulence I put in there, it's making that smoke look pretty puffy. So let's keep this setting because that was pretty badass. Let's go back to simulation, turbulence. Let's just turn those off for now and then see what it's like. Because the whole point of having those turned on was to build some definition into it. I quite like that. And look, we've got some fire just coming out of these windows. That's wicked. A little bit bitty. Got these chunky chunks of smoke. That would be probably improved drastically by upscaling it. And then you'd have like true definition there. Did we turn up our postman? So many options in postmods. They are essentially running operations on different bits of the simulation without changing the simulation. They're just changing the visual properties. So like I said earlier, I was kind of increasing the amount of smoke by like multiplying the smoke by itself. And that would mean where the smoke's already thick, it's going to get thicker. If it's not so thick, it's not going to get much thicker. There are a lot of options in here. And as far as I've read, the masking source is quite an important one. That kind of tells you where it's going to be targeting this effect. So let's try out a couple and see if we can get a good look. So let's go with like pre-processed smoke. Post. Looks different there. Maybe velocity. This sort of thing I could spend all day doing because I'm terrible. Actually, if we just bump this along ever so slightly. Pull this guy down there. Let's just have a look, see what it looks like. Pretty thick, not too wispy. It's occluding some of the explosion. We're going to be hitting the bounds, right? Where are they? Yeah, we're so close to hitting the bounds. But as a little exercise, it's not too bad, right? You could, if you had a better card than I've got. I've only got was it an RTX 2080 Ti? It's got lots of RAM, but it's not super current card. If you're on one of the 30 series, you could probably ramp up the amount of space you've got around this and just go nuts. Start ramping things up. I quite like the look of this. I feel like the smoke is maybe not quite puffy enough. I'll try and work a bit of that back in, but it is at least blocking stuff out. And the fire that you can see is bright enough that it's kind of pushing through. Let's check that shading again. Scattering. Flames contributing to it. Yeah, there we go. Look. Great. So you see where it's all breaking up around here? That is because of our vorticity. There you go. Remember that cheap way of pushing the detail in. If we bring that back down to 25, run it again, see what happens. Oh, so much nicer. That's wicked. Maybe the scattering is a little bit too crazy right now. So you can either bring the flame contribution down, which would dim it, but you can keep it like quite high and then bring up the occlusion so the smoke could kind of stop the light from passing through quite so much. See what that one's like. And also, I don't think we've got any proper lights out, so let's give it a couple of ambient lights or a spotlight or something. Yeah, specifically over here, it doesn't have all of those little bits that are sort of wiggling around in the smoke. And this is kind of reminding me that when we go over to volume, obviously we've got our post mod where we're stacking the smoke up to make it thicker. post-process is one of the first operations that they added to Embergen to do this kind of stuff. Loads of people, they go like, oh, sharpen. Let's just add sharpening in. And let's just ramp it all the way up. It's going to make everything look super detailed, right? And it adds something. But because we're only at like one subdivision, there isn't really that much detail there, okay? It's just kind of up in the contrast. So if we go right back, it'll probably look like a gnarly mess when it comes out. It'll be bright and it'll be sharp, but it won't be particularly fiery. Well, it's not too bad actually. And see how it's giving us more definition. See what it's like when it gets to the smoke. You've got some banding happening around here, but it's when it starts to fade away. See this flickering? One of the things that I like to do, let's get it up to a good point so we can see it exploding. And then because this is like a post-process, we can do it while we're on a pause frame and we can actually make visual changes. I want some smoke. Right, this stuff. So reset this. It's pretty good as it is, but yeah, that sharpen was adding something. I use dilate, all right, and immediately that puffs everything out. But I move it in a negative direction. So if I move this smoke dilate down, we get like wispier smoke. Maybe we could do that with the temperature. You really dial it into what you're after. That's pretty good. The fuel doesn't matter because we're not going to be looking at the fuel. We're in fact going to completely turn it off when we're ready to render. You got this dilate softness as well. So you can push that up or bring it down to bring a bit more definition. That's been my go-to for so long. I've only really recently started using post mods. So that's kind of done a similar job to the sharpen. And unfortunately, you can't run both at the same time, to my knowledge. Let's just see what it's like when it explodes. Let's get rid of that. I'm pretty happy with that. I think by the time you go up a subdivision, so like times 2 it, I love this fire coming out. That's just the fuel that's still in there that's still burning, even though there's no more fuel coming into the scene. I'm pretty happy with that. I think there's probably some problems with my my modeling skills, and I would probably adapt this smoke a little bit if I was really trying to make something polished. But as a little mess around, that's not bad. So right, that was probably the easiest explosion you can make. I faffed around for ages just trying to make it look right. But what you want to focus on is, can it dump fuel? Can it ignite? And can I, mess around with a couple of sliders to make it kind of move the way I want it to move? Remember, you've got things like colliders. So you can contain it in something with a couple of holes, and then when it ignites, it's going to push outward from those. You've got things like forces, you've got your noise, so you can break up that fuel and move it around, and that would kind of sculpt how the explosion comes out. And you've got your line, all right? Mess around with that. So remember that to begin with, just gives you a vertical line in the center of the scene. By default, it's going to be pushing along that line in like a Z direction, or like Y if you're Maya or something. But you can turn that push off and you can just have it rotate around that line. And then there's a balancing act of how fast you want it to spin around and how much sort of gravitational force do you want to bring that stuff back in. So stay on like your, simulation size, no upscaling, just keep it non-upscaled, because then it's going to play nice and smooth and you can see what you're doing while you're messing around with these lines and noises and stuff. You can see how it moves. And then once you've kicked a bit of motion into that fuel and you ignite it, that's when the fun starts. That's when it starts sort of going off in this direction. Or in fact, before we go, because it's like the best thing in Embergen. Not really, but it's one of the best things. Let's go with 0.2 there, 0.2 there. So I've just added some chaotic wind into the scene because that's always good. It's probably going to affect the fuel inside the building, so we might get more come out than we did before. But once it explodes, it's going to move around with the wind. Eventually, maybe I need to make it stronger. Let's go with... I'll go 1 and 1. Where's it going to go? It seems to be affecting it too much today. What if we ramp it right up? Boof. Oh yeah, it is. It's pushing it that way. So, on a stormy, windy beach, we're blowing up this bunker. Come out a bit. Yeah, it's already leaking fuel. Right, it just gets carried off in the wind. Oh, that's amazing. Right, upscale that, and you'd have something pretty decent, I think. It's a really simple thing to add into the scene, but it just tricks your mind into thinking you're looking at an actual, you know, liquid or gas that's moving around in the real world. Cool, right. I'm gonna leave it there. If you have any other ideas, I know someone asked me to do a cloud simulation, so I've got a couple of those on the way, and I'll work out a couple of other different ways of getting these explosions going, because this one was about igniting all the fuel at once by bringing down that minimum temperature. There's other ways to do it. You can ignite, say, a bit of the fuel over here, and then this bit of fuel doesn't ignite right away. You can get some interesting stuff happening with that, and we can use I'm going to say particles, but I'm going to say old school particles because they're about to change in new Embergen. So different types of emitters, we'll mess around with that. I don't mean like actual different emitters. We're talking about the different shapes that you can feed in. So particles is one, and burst is another good one as well. You can get some quite different looking effects that way. Yeah, if you get any ideas, let me know in the comments, and I will try very hard to make new tutorials as and when I can. Just a bit slammed with work. Cool, right. Thank you. Let me know what you make. Post it in the comments or something. See you later.